Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today was day 69 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and today focused on Indigenous consultation. So I'm going to talk to you about that and a few stories that were in the news related to the mass casualty. But before I get to that, I guess you'll notice I've got a new background. Moved into a new spot where I'll be for indefinitely, I guess. So this is the new studio look. Already seeing that there's some potential adjustments there. Anyway, tell me what you think. Hopefully it isn't too it isn't too disorienting for anybody that's been watching for a while. And thanks everybody for watching. It's funny, I wasn't sure what the audience was going to be for these videos. It's kept strong. We're up to almost 70 days of proceedings now, and I've had more than that of videos. So I appreciate everybody following along, sharing it with friends, and just the publicity that's gathered from this. I take it because of it's not only the legal analysis, but I try to say what I'm thinking and speak plainly, and hopefully people appreciate that, and they seem to. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the news stories that came up over the last few days. One has to do with former Nova Scotia Justice Minister Mark Furey. You'll remember that Mark Furey was the Justice Minister who was in place when the mass casualty took place, and then was involved in the development of the mass casualty inquiry, which started out as a review, became an inquiry. But before that, Minister Furey was a Staff Sergeant with the RCMP in Nova Scotia, and though it came out over the weekend that before he was in politics, when he was still a staff sergeant, he wrote this memo to Brian Brennan, who was then the commanding officer of the RCMP in Nova Scotia, who's now the number 2 officer in the country, testified last week, that he had sent this memo recommending the adoption or at least further analysis of the alert ready system, the emergency alert. And so, and it's come out now that was the reason that Mark Furey retired from the RCMP. And so it's really quite something. You're watching these staff sergeants and the white shirts, the superintendents and commanders and all of the head RCMP officers, and it's like a viper pit. Everybody's protecting their own territory, attacking anybody else that was, that may thwart their reputation in some way. And this appears to be, to me at least, what Mark Furey is doing here. When I read this over the weekend and a few different news outlets picked it up, my thought was, boy, it's too bad that he was never in a position since then to do anything about it or say anything about it. I mean, come on. The Minister of Justice, he could have done much more with the emergency alert system. It sounds like now, in retrospect, that he's saying, well, this is the reason I left the RCMP, this is why I retired, that they were closed-minded to this new thing. Well, then he became the Justice Minister for the province. Could have been among the initiatives that he championed and didn't. So, not sure what to make of all that. It seems like he's trying to polish his reputation in retrospect. So, I'll leave it at that. Another thing that related to Brian Brennan's testimony was this news story today talking about, I think CBC contacted the RCMP about this potential recording of the conference call that has generated all of this publicity about potential political interference. This call of April 28th, 2020, where Brenda Luckie and a few others in Ottawa conferenced in the Nova Scotia RCMP leadership team and really took them to task for their communications failings, not identifying the firearms that the gunman used, all of those things. Well, the RCMP's media relations coordinator or something, Dan Bryan, had made a recording of at least part of that conversation. And so, of course, everybody would be fascinated to hear it, to see whose account that recording actually supports, because there's differing perspectives on it. But we are told that that recording doesn't exist. It was deleted. Nobody's taken any steps to try to look for it, in the cloud or through any other means, through a search warrant. None of that stuff has taken place. So it seems like that may not turn into anything. But just another example, I think, in a way, of the RCMP or individuals within the RCMP not taking their disclosure obligations seriously, as I think the public would like them to have done so. Okay, so that's the second thing. Third thing was, over the weekend we got the election of Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and it's hard to know whether that is going to have much of an impact, if anything, on the Mass Casualty Commission's recommendations or the status of the RCMP in Nova Scotia, but just a few points. Of course, first of all, it was Prime Minister Trudeau that appointed Brenda Lucki and many of the senior officers. I would note that Rick Perkins and Dr. Scott Ellis, the two MPs in Nova Scotia, have been pretty vocal, asking questions on the National Security Committee of the senior RCMP officers. Now, I will say on the flip side of that Sean Fraser, the Minister of Immigration, MP for Pictou, Antigonish, had, I think it was instrumental in changing the review to an inquiry, and certainly reacted to public pressure. He's a lawyer as well, before he entered politics. But, if you're looking forward, it seems like Poilievre is not one to be afraid to go after institutions, as he's done with the Bank of Canada and other institutions, and seems, I'd say, the Conservatives would probably be more inclined to respect provincial, local decision-making, which might relate into creating a provincial police force. So we'll see how that develops, if at all. Like, he didn't mention really the RCMP or the Mass Casualty Commission in any of his campaign events, from what I noticed, but there's potential there. Okay, so today, Indigenous consultation. This, like I say, fraught with potential linguistic pitfalls for all sort of non-Indigenous participants, including me, I guess. The day it started half an hour late, 10 o'clock. There was two sort of talking circles. So one was in the morning, one in the afternoon. They were both moderated by Cheryl Copage-Giu, who's the Indigenous consultant for Halifax Regional Municipality, and Dr. Emma Cunliffe, who's the Director of Research for the Mass Casualty Commission. The first circle included Elder Marlene Companion, Noel Brooks, who's a bylaw officer in Millbrook, Luke Markey, who is a security officer in Millbrook, Jared Watton from Glooscap First Nation, and Clifford Paul from Membertou, who's on the Nova Scotia RCMP advisory group. So I would notice in the discussion, okay, so the circle, I'll explain that first, I guess. There was some rules with the circle. You couldn't interrupt anybody, and which became a bit of, I don't know if it's a problem or not, but I mentioned it. People would go on at length and nobody was interrupting or stopping them. Nobody seemed to be too terribly conscious of time, which was fine. It was a good discussion. There was a sacred eagle feather, which Elder Companion brought with her and would be passed around the circle and held by whoever was speaking. And everybody was very respectful. I was conscious that, certainly Dr. Cunliffe and the commissioners were being very mindful or potentially careful to be respectful, really to the point of not really engaging much with what was being said, certainly not challenging anything that was being offered as an opinion or a suggestion. They were just sort of listening and, So, I don't know. It's hard to know if it was genuine genuine interest and a genuine desire to listen, or if it's some sort of patronizing, paternalistic, okay, we'll just listen to them and move on. But that's fine. You don't know until we see the report what the commissioners will make of all this. Some interesting stuff there. I mean, throughout this, the Indigenous participants, they were talking about, they weren't aware of the tragedy as it was unfolding. Brooks and Markey were both working in Millbrook, not far away. They mentioned how the killer stopped in Millbrook, and that was sort of, that bothered everybody that he was there. Nobody was telling them. Clifford Paul made an interesting few comments. Clifford Paul was a member of the tribal police. This was a police force that was in existence following the Marshall inquiry recommendations, only lasted for about 5 years. He identified, and others did later, that it was a very low paid position and there were some other difficulties. The tribal police were told basically not to leave the reserve. This interoperability seemed to be a problem with the concept, and it didn't really last. I was really interested in hearing more about the tribal police and how that worked or didn't work and why, because if you think going forward on recommendations, there may be a new police force in Nova Scotia, but it would seem appropriate that there be a different police force, or at least a wing of the force that concentrates on the Mi'kmaq communities and Indigenous communities. So it would have been nice to hear more about the barriers to success that the tribal police faced back when Clifford Paul was a member, but that was mentioned and then everybody moved on. So the afternoon session, again, Elder Marlene Companion was part of it. Lena Knockwood, who's a councillor at Sebekanekadi First Nation, Juliana Julian from Buckenkeg, Philippa Picto, Sharon Rudderham, Lorianne Sylvester, who's from Member 2, Duma Young, Casey, now former head of the Nova Scotia Barrister Society, assistant professor at CBU from Eskasoni was there, and Carla Stevens. So good discussion, lots of discussion about everybody's personal memories of April 19th. And in fact, the one thing about the circle that was interesting is the commissioners joined in as well, and were giving their, their bona fides as friends to Indigenous peoples, but also just where they were. Commissioner Fitch was talking about being out in her barn and listening to the radio and getting CBC Halifax on the weekend up in Fredericton, and that's how she learned and all these sorts of things. So now it was an interesting perspective because, there's all of these institutions, the health institution, the police, all of this are colonized institutions. And so, I don't like the term, but it was used today. They're not safe spaces for Mi'kmaq and Indigenous people. So, and the comment was made a few times, well, for years, decades, hundreds of years, the Mi'kmaq have viewed the police with sort of a mistrust, perhaps a mutual mistrust, and that's been a major problem. And now Nova Scotians are getting a sense of what that's been like. That mistrust that's been there for generations is now something we're seeing. Broken relationships, very difficult to repair. So that was sort of an interesting comparison, I guess, if you could say. Now, a lot of emotional stories, of course, when you talk about the Indigenous experience in Canada and Nova Scotia. Hard to know, other than making that comparison of the broken trust with the police. I'm not sure exactly how much the commissioners will take out of this, other than having appreciated everybody coming in to speak. Like I said, I would have liked to have heard more about the tribal police model and why that didn't work, but maybe that's for another day. Anyway, so that was it for today. Some interesting news articles over the weekend with Mark Furey trying to polish his reputation in retrospect. Some more disclosure issues with the RCMP with Dan Bryan having recorded and then apparently deleted that key conversation. And lots of interesting discussions today with the Indigenous consultation. So tomorrow there's going to be further panels dealing with police oversight, supervision, and accountability. So I'm sure this will talk about the citizen oversight panels, serious incident response team, after the fact analysis of police actions, those sorts of things. So anyway, I'll watch that and bring my report to you. And anyway, thanks again for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.